Hi everyone, this video is for chapter 10 from the Cooper book, Applied Behavior Analysis, 2nd edition. I just want to apologize for taking so long to post this video. It's been a very tough time for many of us, and just to sit and produce something that can really benefit people is kind of hard at this time. I've been working from home since March 2019, so it hasn't been a very easy time for me. But I thought, I really should just do it and try my best. And maybe by doing this chapter the way I'm going to do it now, it will be just a start to encourage myself to continue with the next chapters from Cooper book. So what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to look at the summary of this chapter, page 253, and I'm going to read off from the summary and explain, as much as I can. Just a reminder for everybody, for all the chapters I have posted, this is not something that you should study from. It's more of a review to refresh your memory if you need to kind of remember what this chapter was speaking about and what concepts you need to review. So it's not really something you should study from. It's not very thorough. So you, again, should use these chapter summaries just to refresh your memory. So for chapter 10, it's really talking about planning and evaluating applied behavior analysis research. How do we do research in applied behavior analysis, and how is it different from other kind of research? So it talks about the importance of individual subject in behavior research. So when we do research in applied behavior analysis, we focus on the individual and not really a group of people, because we're dealing with behavior, and if you remember, behavior is really an activity of an organism, so it's not really an activity of a group of people. Sometimes we do look at a group of people to understand socially significant behavior, but if we see variability in their behaviors, we like to focus more on the individual to understand why there's variability among the group. So again, at the end of our research, we usually go back to the one individual and the one behavior we're interested in. It talks about the importance, and the first point here is that the focus on the behavior of individual subjects has enabled applied behavior analysis or analysts to discover and refine effective interventions for a wide range of socially significant behaviors. So by studying, individuals, we start to understand the human behavior, and it's very important to focus on the individual subject to be able to intervene effectively. Knowing that the average performance of a group of subjects change may not reveal anything about the performance of individual subjects. Again, if we're looking at a group of people, we're not really able to understand the one individual subject, and therefore we may not be able to help this one person who needs help. To be most useful, a treatment must be understood at the level at which people come into contact with it and are affected by it, the individual level. So again, if you're studying behavior in the environment, it's very difficult for you to say, I understand why this person did that, because, and then, kind of like take it back to the group and say, oh, he did this because the whole group did this. It's not that simple. Sometimes you really need to dig deeper into the one individual to understand the behavior and the environment, and not just say, this person did this kind of behavior because most of his friends or the group that we're studying did the same thing. It could be because of a different variable. So again, basically, it's just saying, individual research is very important because you come to this individual level to understand how this person had contact with this environment and why his behavior happened based on what happened in his own environment as an individual. The researcher who contributes the effects of unknown or uncontrolled variables to chance is unlikely to identify and analyze important variables. So again, of course, in research we know that we cannot say, oh, it's by chance, and therefore it's very important to focus on what happened and control for the variables that you're not sure of. To control the effects of any variable, a researcher must either hold it constant throughout the experiment or manipulate it as an independent variable. So basically, if a person is studying a behavior and it's impacted by a specific variable, and you're trying to study this behavior, you really have to control for that variable and make it an independent variable. Which means that if you are going to study a behavior of crying, and you know, or you have a hypothesis that this crying is due to gaining attention afterwards, but you're still studying this idea or hypothesis, then you really should control for the control for the attention to see if the crying is going to change. So by doing that, you are manipulating the environment and you're making the attention an independent variable and the crying the dependent variable. So it's really important for you as a researcher to control for variables you're studying. A great strength of within-subject experimental design is the convincing demonstration of a functional relation made possible by replication within the design itself. So again, studying subject or within-subject designs is very beneficial because it does show you a functional relation. So again, if you are you are controlling for attention to see if crying is going to change, and you do this experiment, or not experiment, more like of a manipulation to the environment. Every time you manipulate the environment the same way, you get the same results. Then you have a very strong functional relation, and you are able to demonstrate that by controlling the environment and manipulating it. And you cannot do that with a group, and that's the whole point of this idea, that you really have to focus on one individual and one behavior and one environment to get this functional relation. But if you have a group of people, it's very difficult to do that. When group results do not represent individual performance, researchers should supplement group data with individual results. So it's the same idea, that if it doesn't give you what you want to go back to individual research. It's very important also to be flexible in experimental design. So it talks about the importance of flexibility in experimental design. A good experimental design is any sequence and type of independent variable manipulations that produces data that effectively and convincingly address the research question. So when you are designing your or coming up with a design to study a specific variable or behavior, it's very important for you to be flexible and understand the research question, be very specific about the research question to be able to answer it, and be able to use flexibility in your research design to meet or to answer this research question. To investigate the research question of interest, an experimenter must often build an experimental design that employs a combination of analytic tactics. So you are a behavior analyst, we analyze data, we try to understand why this is happening or why this keep happening. And for you to be able to answer a research question, you must have a research design or experimental design that has a degree of analysis. Okay, so you're analyzing what's going on. And it should not be one, it should be a combination of analytic tactics. So you really should be flexible in a way you're looking at things and not just put one design in front of you and stick with it, even though you can start to figure out that there's something else going on in the environment. There's a different variable that needs to be examined differently with a different analytic tactic. So you really should be flexible and not rigid in the way you're looking at things, especially if you realize there's something that you were not considering when you started your design or you started your research. And after a lot, when you try to understand something and then something else comes up and that you haven't really thought of before. The most effective experimental designs use ongoing evaluation of data from individual subjects as a basis for employing the 3 elements of baseline logic, which is prediction, verification, and replication. So this is, we spoke about in the previous chapters, the 3 elements for a good baseline logic to show a functional relation and to show that your research question or what you're studying is really what you the way you examine what you're studying is really what you need to do to get to the answer of the research question. So your design is not answering a different research question. It's really, it fits what you're looking for, what you're trying to understand. Internal validity, controlling potential sources of confounding in experimental design. So now we're going to talk about internal validity and really trying to control for what could be something that may impact the behavior you're studying, and how to control for that, what we call confounding variable, to be able to get your results and understand them. Experiments that demonstrate a clear functional relation between the independent variable and the target behavior are said to have a high degree of internal validity. So when we say internal validity, is really that we know the variable that is impacting the behavior and we're studying it and trying to prove, or not prove, but find a functional relation between the behavior and the environment. And if we do so, then we do have internal validity. So our research design or experiment is valid and the results can be taken into consideration when we try to intervene or create a program for the individual we're working with. The strength of an experimental design is determined by the extent to which A. demonstrates a reliable effect, and B. eliminates or reduces the possibility that factors other than the independent variable produced the behavior change. So again, internal validity or the design you're doing, experimental design, is strong if you are able to show functional relation every time you do the experimental design, and you're not getting different answers every time you do it. Of course, it has to be consistent. That's number one. Also, it's strong if it eliminates or reduces the possibility that factors other than the independent variable that's happening. So if your research question is about, again, the crying and the attention, and every time you're reducing the attention, the crying decreases, then you get to a point where you say, okay, so crying was reinforced by the attention, so now the kid's not crying anymore because attention is taken away from him. But then if you feel that something else is happening with the attention, then your experimental design may not be very strong, and then you have to really control for this other thing that coexist or co-happen with the attention to be able to actually say, yes, it was the attention causing the crying and not the attention and something else in the environment. It could be toy, tangible, who knows, some sensory thing that happens with the attention. So again, it's very important to get the same results and control for all the variables. That could be a possibility that something is changing in the behavior cause of it. And then it talks about the phrase control behavior is technically inaccurate because the experimenter controls only some aspect of the subject's environment. So we don't control behavior, we control the environment, and as a result of this control we do to the environment, we see the change in behavior, and that's when we say manipulation of the environment. So we don't really control behavior. A confounding variable is an uncontrolled factor not known or suspected to have exerted influence on the dependent variable. Okay, we all know that a confounding variable is something that's outside of what we're trying to study, but it's still causing a change in the dependent variable, and that's why we have to control for it. Steady state responding is a primary means by which applied behavior analysts assess the degree of experimental control. So again, steady state, which means every time you use the same manipulation to the environment, you get the same results. And by that, you are you are in control, experimental control.
Confounding variables can be viewed as related primarily to one of four elements of an experiment: subject, setting, measurement as dependent variable, and independent variable. So confounding variables, again, are the variables that could have an impact on the behavior or the research question, things that are not controlled in the environment. And these could be due to the subject himself or herself, the setting or the environment, the measurement of the dependent, the way you're measuring the dependent or the way you're measuring the independent variables could be the cause of the confounding variable that has an impact on the behavior. So you really need to control for that by changing your design, changing the environment, changing the way you're measuring the dependent or the independent variables. A placebo control is designed to separate any effects that may be produced by subjects' expectations of improvement as a result of receiving treatment from the effects actually produced by the treatment. So we know that placebo basically is a group of is a group that does not get the treatment, and therefore, but they don't know about it, or the individual does not know that he's not getting the treatment. So then, basically, it's a way to find out if the treatment is really working, or is it just an effect because you know or you have expectations that it should work. Treatment integrity and procedure fidelity refer to the extent to which an independent variable is implemented or carried out as planned. So when you have an independent variable, which is what you're manipulating in the environment, let's take the attention, for example, and you have a plan, you're trying to follow a plan on how to manipulate the environment, and how to manipulate the attention, when to give attention and when not to give attention. Treatment integrity here is basically the degree you are really following the plan, the written plan, and how much you've followed this plan. And of course, if you're following it 100%, then you have high level of integrity, treatment integrity. But low treatment integrity invites a major source of confounding into an experiment, making it difficult, if not impossible, to interpret the results with confidence. So again, if you not following the plan, your treatment integrity is low, and that could cause confounding variable to not be controlled and have an impact on the behavior, and then you won't be able to say that you have confidence in your results. One threat to treatment integrity, treatment drift, occurs when application of the independent variable during later phases of an experiment differs from the way the treatment was applied in the outset of the study. So basically, if you're starting out with a design or a certain manipulation to the environment, and by time your manipulation started to change because you're drifting away from what you're supposed to do, that is a threat to treatment integrity, because again, you're not following what you've decided to do, or your design, experimental design, and you've drifted away. So for example, if we're gonna provide attention after the crying of the child every 10 minutes of the crying, we are going to provide attention to see if delayed attention would change anything in the behavior of the crying. And then by time, as we were doing the experiment, we started to wait more minutes than 10 minutes, so kind of drifting away from what we decided to do. Then there's a low treatment integrity, and that could change from the crying behavior, but then the change may not be because of what we are looking for or what we are studying. It could be because of something else. So we are inviting a confounding variable to play a role when we really don't need to, if we stick to our plan that we have decided to go for or with. Achieving a high level of treatment integrity begins with an operation definition of treatment procedures. So we have to have a definition of what we are going to do. What is the operation here? Written down, very specific, very brief. It says here, treatments are simple, precise, and brief, and that require relatively little effort and it's more likely to be delivered with consistency than those that are not. So if it's not brief, it's not precise, many times you won't be able to actually follow it, and that could cause a problem. And again, you won't have high treatment integrity because you are unable to follow what's written. And if what's written or what's planned is really difficult, complicated, not brief, not precise, then you won't get consistent. You will be consistent in delivering the plan. Okay, so that would, of course, change the integrity or the treatment integrity. Researchers should not assume that a person's general competence or experience in the experimental setting, or that providing the intervention agent with detailed written instruction or a script will ensure a high degree of treatment integrity. So you really shouldn't say, oh, he's done this so many times, he knows what to do. You really have to have everything written down, very specific and very detailed for the individual to be able to follow the plan. Now they talk about social validity. What is social validity? It's assessing the applied value of behavior changes and the treatment that accomplish them. Okay, so now you're trying to change a behavior or teach a behavior. Why are you doing that? You're doing that for social significance. As we mentioned before, it's really something that you want to change. You want to change in the life of a certain individual to make it better, and that's why you're working on this specific behavior. But then, how much you need to work on this behavior is what's called social validity. How valuable it is to change your behavior to a certain degree. So it's again assessing the applied value of behavior changes and the treatments that accomplish them. Okay, so the social validity of an applied behavior analysis can be assessed in three ways. The social significance, as I mentioned, of the target behavior, the appropriateness of the procedures, and the social importance of the results. What is social important? What is the results going to help, or how is this person going to benefit from the results socially? And again, the social significance of the target behavior, meaning is this really a priority in his life, or is it something that would really change his life to the better? Social validity assessments are most often accomplished by seeking consumer opinions. So this is really interesting when it comes to behavior analysis, because we are very cautious when it comes to collecting data, and we have to be very specific, as we mentioned, and we're very careful with the treatment integrity and operation definitions. But then when it comes to social validity, who decides that this is socially valid? And it's really consumer opinion. So the client or his parents or people that are competent in this specific behavior would tell you if it's socially significant, if it's really helping him or not. Alright, so consumer opinions is a way we assess them. So socially valid goals can be determined empirically by assessing the performance of individuals judged to be highly competent and experimentally manipulating different levels of performance to determine socially valid outcomes. So even though we ask consumers about what they think, it's very important to determine the goals empirically by assessing the performance of the behavior to see if it's really reached the goal that we want. Is this goal important for the individual? Is this what we want? Is this socially significant, or should we push for more, or should we expect less? So there's ways to assess that, and we just really need to know if it's highly competent, experimentally manipulating different levels of performance to determine socially valid outcomes. Very important also to look at the levels of how this behavior can be performed based on the individual. Several scales and questionnaires for obtaining consumers' opinions of the acceptability of behavior interventions have been developed. So again, consumer opinion is very important. So questionnaires and interviews are done to understand if behavior interventions are really helping, and if it's what we want to make a difference in this individual life. Methods for assessing the social validity of outcomes include comparing participant performance to the performance of a normative sample. So we want to see if this person we're working with is able to do it compared to the normative sample how others people do it, or the average person would do it, or the majority of people do it. Using a standardized assessment instrument, you can also use a standardized assessment. Asking consumers to rate the social validity of participant performance. So asking other people, what do you think of this person? Is he able to perform it in a way that's is socially significant, and it's actually going to make a change or a difference, in his daily life? Asking experts to evaluate participant performance. So if you know someone who's really good at doing a specific behavior or task, you can ask this person who's very competent to evaluate your client's ability to do the same task. Testing participant newly learned level of performance in the natural environment. Testing participants' newly learned level of performance in a natural environment. So now you've been teaching this individual to do a specific task or a specific behavior. Now you want to see if he's able to carry this to his natural environment with other people or other environments, other settings. So that's also a way to assess social validity when it comes to performance. Okay, so external validity is something else that the chapter speaks about, and it's replicating experiments to determine the generality of research findings. So when we do research on one individual or a few individuals, we are contributing to research findings, because basically external validity refers to the degree to which a functional relation found reliable and socially valid in a given experimental will hold under different conditions. So if you're working on under a specific condition and you do find there's a strong functional relation, then maybe under different conditions, the same way you manipulated the environment or your experimental design could work in a different condition. So then replication would help others find out if it actually can benefit other people under different conditions, and if it does, then you have external validity to your experiment. But to know that, you have to replicate it under different conditions. The proper inferences about the results of a group's design study are from the sample to the population, not from the sample to the individual. So when we study an individual or two or three and we find out results that maybe we have not seen before, then we can take this to the population or to a group of other people, not in the individual, meaning we are taking one thing and we're trying to use it on multiple people, and not the other way around. We're not taking from an individual to another individual. We are taking one thing and trying to generalize it to help others. But again, we do that, but we do it on an individual basis, meaning I will take this study and I'm going to replicate it with my client, and not just one client. Maybe I have 10 clients. I'm going to do it with the 10 clients separately, of course, individually. But then that means we are taking one thing to the whole population to help them out, and not just to one person. That's what I'm trying to explain here. It's not really for one person, but it's for a group of people, population. It's the generality of research findings that apply behavior analysis is assessed, established, and specified by the application of experiments. That's how we understand applied behavior analysis, is just by replicating designs that have worked and treatments that have worked, and we just replicate it to see what else we can do to help others, and in which condition this would work or won't work. In a systematic replication, the researcher purposefully varies one or more aspects of an earlier experiment. So if you're replicating, you're doing systematic replication, you're taking one experiment that was used and worked, and you're applying it to a new situation, but not fully new. You're just changing one or two of the aspects of an earlier experiment. So it's not just applying it to a brand new idea or study. It's really just changing one or two things. When a systematic replication successfully produces the results of various research. It not only demonstrates reliability of the earlier findings, but also adds to the external validity of the earlier findings by showing that the same effect can be obtained under different conditions. Okay, so again, you're not just saying that this is reliable because every time I do it, it gives me the same results. It's reliable because I've used it in a different context or under different conditions, and it still worked. Okay. Systematic replications occur in both planned and unplanned ways through the work of many experimenters in a given area, and they result in a body of knowledge with significant scientific integrity and technological value. So again, you could be doing a study and you changed a few things from something that you have you've read about, and a treatment that you've used, and then you're using it again using systematic replications, which means you're using it under a different condition or aspect, and then you may realize that it's working for different condition or under a different situation, and you have not planned that, and that's why it says here that it can occur both planned and unplanned ways through the work of experimenters. Evaluating applied behavior analysis research, which is really the main idea or main focus of this chapter, and it talks about the quality and value of an applied behavior analysis study may be evaluated by seeking answers to a sequence of questions related to the internal validity, which we spoke about, social validity, external validity, and the scientific and theoretical significance of the study. Okay, so this is just a review of what we've been speaking about or talking about in the previous chapters, in this chapter as well. So really, if you need to have a good research, applied behavior analysis study, research, you need to evaluate these areas: the social validity, how significant it is for the client, is he able to do it, how to what degree is he able to do it, how it's going to benefit him. Internal validity, do you have a functional relation? When you do the study, do you see the same consistent results every time you manipulate the environment? Are you able to control for confounding variables? External validity, are you able to use what you've seen in different, not different contexts, but basically you're able to use the same experiment under different conditions to get external validity. Also, the question for the scientific significance of the study. Is your study basically able to help others in the future if they replicate it, if they use systematic replication? Is it really strong enough? It has treatment integrity, high in treatment integrity, where you're really using what you've written to study a specific behavior and get the same results every time you do it. And by that, someone else could use what you've written or used to do a replication. So again, if you do not have, if you don't really have a high treatment integrity, which means you're not following what you've designed, what you've planned to do or you've designed to do in your experiment, this next person who's coming to use your plan or your study may not really be able to benefit, because what you've applied is different from what is on paper, and that is what we call low treatment integrity. You did not follow what you was planning, and then your result is not consistent, and then no one can really use what you've done because what we've planned to do, because it did not show external validity or internal validity, and of course it's not going to show systematic replication, and would not show the same results. So your external and internal validity are poor. There's something called type 1 error, and it occurs when a researcher concludes that the independent variable had an effect on the dependent variable when it did not. Okay, so that's one situation. And the type 2 error occurs when a researcher concludes that the independent variable did not have an effect on the dependent variable when it actually did. So these are two types of errors that could occur with research design. A study can demonstrate a functional relation between the independent variable and a socially important target behavior, and thus be significant from an applied perspective, yet contribute little to the advancement of the fields. Alright, so that's just an example of saying that, sometimes we can help by using a specific, not help, we can study something and we can show a functional relation, and it could be a strong one, and it could be socially important target behavior, but it may not really contribute to advancement of our field, which is possible. Only when all of the variables influencing a functional relation have been identified and accounted for can an analysis be considered complete. So when we say we have analyzed this and we know what's going on, you can only say that only when all the variables influencing a functional relation have been identified. Only when you know what's going on in the environment and why this specific independent variable is causing a change in the dependent variable, and you're able to manipulate it and see the changes in the behavior of the dependent variable. When evaluating the scientific significance of a research report, readers should consider the technological description of the experiment, the interpretation and discussion of the results, and the level of conceptual sense and integrity. So when you're looking at a research report, you're not just looking at the results of what happened, you're really looking at the limitations of the study. You're looking at how they interpret the results. You're looking at the discussion, which usually tells you what should have been done differently, or what could have impacted the results, and maybe next research study should focus on this one area instead of this area to actually kind of improve from the research design or study to get more to get more confidence in the way they're collecting the results. So it's really important to look at the technological description of the experiments. So that's chapter 10. I'm sorry if this was not the greatest way presenting it without visuals. But I thought this may be of a good way to get things going again, and I also thought this chapter is really a review of the previous chapters, or the few previous chapters about research designs and experimental design. So I hope you liked, or not like, at least there's some benefit to this video. If you have any questions, please send me an email, and thank you so much.